Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the May 23rd work session of the Charles County Board of Education. Can we please begin with the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Schwartz, is there anyone signed up for public forum?
There's no one signed up for public forum this evening.
All right, thank you very much. We will proceed then with the rest of the meeting. First on the agenda is the Educational Facility Master Plan, and that is Mr. Heim, I believe.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
This evening I have an information item, the Educational Master Facilities Plan. This is one of the required documents that every school system has to submit to the IAC on behalf for support of their CIP. So I want to highlight a few areas of the document, and then this document will come back up during the June board meeting as an action item for approval. It is due to the IAC before July 20th. So as mentioned, this is one of the supporting documents to support our both renovations and construction and systemic renovations that we submit to the state on an annual basis. The first section of this document talks about goals and standards for CCPS. Section A talks about the organization of our schools and grade levels, programs within our schools such as Title I, Judy centers that are located within a number of our schools. Section B talks about student-staff ratios. And overall, when you look at the school system, we have a teacher-to-student ratio of 25 or less, and of course that varies by grade level and by program. Section C of the document talks about transportation policies, how we try to create an efficient system for transporting our kids to and from school, with keeping kids on the buses the least amount of time as possible, but also providing an economically efficient transportation program. Section D talks about our school zones and redistricting and how some of those decisions are made in terms of setting up school zones, and also when we have to set up redistricting committees as a result of either a new building opening or just some overcrowding in some of our neighboring schools. So sometimes we do redistricting processes without a new building being opened or a current building being renovated and added capacity being added to that building. Section E talks about some of those programs that I mentioned that are contained within our schools, the gifted education program, special education programs, and Section F. Section G is extensive and it talks about our career tech programs, our CTE programs that are within our high schools. Section H talks about support programs such as our school counselors that are located within each of our schools, school nurses, and school psychologists. Section I talks about school closing procedures, and no, this is not about an event of inclement weather. This is an event that a school system has to close a school because of declining enrollment. Here in Charles County, to my knowledge, that especially since before 1997, I'm not aware of us having to close any schools. But again, school systems have to be prepared to address that in their document in the event that they would need to close the school because of the declining enrollment. And then the last three sections of the document talk about our 10-year, and they illustrate our 10-year enrollment projections. This is something that we also have to submit to the Maryland Department of Planning. So we get numbers from the state in March, April timeframe. We have to review those numbers, and if our numbers are not within 5% of the numbers that they supply, then we have to provide written explanation to why we're not within 5%. This year's numbers are within the 5% of the numbers submitted from the Maryland Department of Planning. The next to last section talks about our project schedule, so it talks about proposed upcoming construction projects. And then lastly, the last section talks about systemic renovation, so if we are replacing a boiler or replacing a roof at a particular school. So at this point, I would entertain any questions that anyone has about the document.
Any questions from any board members? Anyone? I have one question with regard to the projected enrollment.
Okay?
Does that take into account everything that we as a system know as far as planned developments and latest growth per the county APFO?
Yes, so we'll, in sharing information with the county planning and growth management and proposed developments that they have, whether they are approved or pending approval from the county, we look at those within that 10-year average or 10-year period that we are looking to analyze between us and the state. So it is taken into consideration anything in the books that we're aware of and then the county is aware of over the next 10 years.
All right, very good, thank you.
And there may be a few minor changes to some of the information about programs. As I mentioned, in sections E through G, we have that information out to a couple of the offices and departments where there may be some revisions to some of that information. So if anything is revised between now and when we present this as an action item in June, we'll make that known to the board and to the public.
All right, very good, thank you, Mr. Heim.
Thank you.
Next, we have a number of policies. I believe that's going to be Mr. Schwartz. We saw these at our last board meeting as an information item.
Correct, and these policies are now coming back as a report item. We'll bring them back next month for action, with one exception I'll mention when we get to it. I'll go through them briefly again to remind the board what these policy changes are. Policy 1314 simply changes the title of deputy superintendent and takes that reference out since we don't have a deputy superintendent as of July 1st. Policy 3430 similarly changes the title of certain employees of ours from assistant superintendent of fiscal services to chief financial officer, and also takes a reference away from the gender of the superintendent. Policy 3533.1 is the policy that Mr. Andritz had presented last month. This has now been put into policy formatting, given a policy number of 3533.1. Again, this will come back as an action item at next month's meeting. It's a requirement that the state is looking for. Policy 5127 is another policy required by the state dealing with registered sex offenders on school grounds, requiring us to provide an education for these individuals even if they're not allowed on school property. And the policy will be followed up with superintendent's rules, which will lay out the details of how this will be carried out in Charles County based on guidance from the State Department of Education. Policy 6412.4 deals with parent requests for alternative materials. It changes the title of, again, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction to Chief of Teaching and Learning. It also references the objection of parents being upheld before the appeal process kicks in. Currently, the process is there in the rules, policy, in policy, and the rules do have that practice laid out. The language is clarifying now that that appeal process only kicks in if the parent's objection is not upheld. Policy 6425, again, changes the title of Assistant Superintendent of Instruction to Chief of Teaching and Learning to match the title change as of July 1st. Policy 6462 removes reference to Assistant Superintendent of School Administration and allows the Department of Research and Assessment to decide whether research applications should be approved for Charles County. Policy 9350 deals with appeals to the Board of Education and makes two changes. One is to handle procedural matters that come to the board on appeals, whether an appeal may be untimely, for example, and how that will be handled by the board. Currently, there is no separate process to handle procedural matters for appeals. And the second change is to clarify that the decisions of the superintendent will be upheld by the board unless the board determines that the superintendent's decision was arbitrary, unreasonable, or illegal, a standard that the board has been using for many years. It was in board policy for many years, and we're clarifying that in current policy. And then finally, policy 8160 is the ethics policy. Makes changes that are required by the State Ethics Commission. This is the policy that will not come back as an action item at the next meeting if the board is approving the report, so that the State Ethics Commission can approve the policy before the board takes final action at a future board meeting. So all of these policies, except for this last one, will come back as an action item at the June 14th board meeting.
Are there any questions on any of these policies? Mr. Hancock.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. Mr. Schwartz, in reference to policy 6412.4, where we are being briefed with the recommendation to add if an objection is upheld, if an objection is upheld, doesn't, and I understand what that we're trying to we're not, some members of the community believe that we're trying to change something where I know we're not. But there is, some people are concerned with changing the wording to this policy. So my question is, doesn't the word, say if we leave out if an objection is upheld, and we already have what's in place, it says an alternate student assignment may be offered. Doesn't the word may pretty much clarify that for us without adding that other language?
It could. The confusion may be over the word, the meaning of the word may, because somebody may read into that may allows that alternative assignment to automatically be provided. If you look at the next sentence, it would say reading the material and participating in the material can't be used as a requirement for passing the course of study. So if you combine those two, it implies that an alternative assignment for that passage must be provided. And that was never the intent. If it were the intent of the board, then there would no longer have to be any appeal process, which is the next paragraph down. Mm-hmm. So there would be no reason for an appeal if the parent's request is automatically upheld. So I think the board intended, and I think it needed to be clarified, that the alternative assignment will only be provided if the objection is upheld. Now that may be concerning to some, thinking that somehow we just turn down requests on a regular basis, which is not the case. In all of my years here, we've never had any of these issues rise to the level of the board. They've been handled by staff routinely and pretty consistently, where staff will meet with parents who object, discuss the objection, why they object. Often some alternative assignment could be provided without changing the course of study. Often the parents will understand the reason why the assignment is required and agree with it. And none of those issues have ever risen past that level to come to an appeal to the superintendent or beyond, because it's done smoothly. The concern, though, is there might be one or two issues down the road where a parent may raise an objection. We go through that process, but the parent then says, the policy does require that the alternative assignment be provided, and I can't be, my son or child, my daughter can't be held responsible for passing that or completing that course of study, and that's not what we intended it to say.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
And does anyone else have anything? If I could, Mr. Schwartz, so, you know, and Mr. Hancock and yourself kind of hit on it. When it says an objection is upheld, you know, to me that I think because this is board policy, people may think that that objection is one that comes to us, the elected board. But as you stated, that is, this has been routinely handled by administration in a school, and for certain material, if the parent doesn't want the child to participate just in that portion of the material, then an alternative assignment has been given, and that is the expected. That practice is expected to continue with these changes.
Correct. I would not expect this to change any practice and the way we handle current objections now. When we have those discussions with parents, either the teacher does directly and says, oh, I'll just give another assignment, that's easy to handle. If the teacher has any concerns, they can always consult with instructional specialists, their principal, central office, and talk through the process. When there needs to be a meeting with the parents to talk it through, that's held as well. And in all cases we've had to date that since I've been here in 21 years, those have been handled to the satisfaction of everyone at the lower level.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Abel?
I would just like to reiterate what I said at the last board meeting, and I cannot support this policy as written with that wording in place.
Specifically, what wording?
Adding if an objection is upheld.
Okay.
So this will come back as an action item at the next board meeting, except for the ethics policy, which will be sent to the State Ethics Commission for approval.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Ms. Abel.
I'm sorry, and maybe I missed it while I was reading one of the other policies, but policy 3533.1,
Yes.
was that part of our package at the last board meeting?
This was the policy that was presented by Mr. Jrotc. We took his proposal to the board as an information item and put it in a policy format, so it looks different.
Okay.
So this
Yeah.
particular document was not, but the wording was the same.
Okay, I just didn't have it previously bundled with all the other policies, so I did.
So we took Mr. Jrotc's proposal to the board and we gave it a policy number so the policy can fit right into our other policies. And we put it in what it looks like as a board policy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and next is, make sure no other questions from any board members. So next is the eligibility policy.
This is coming forward as an action item for the board tonight.
So at our last meeting, we had discussion and presentation from the superintendent and staff, and these proposed changes to the policy. They're up on the screen now. So this is up for an action item. So at this time, the board will entertain a motion. Mr. Hurd.
I move to accept the staff's recommendation for the policy.
It's moved by Mr. Hurd,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Brown. Is there any discussion? Yes, Mr. Hancock.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. I know as we've gone through this process, I've expressed my concerns with changing the policy as a whole, but especially with the if you're looking on our board docs page where it talks about eliminating the students who are absent fewer than 5 days from previous quarter, and then it continues with that also adding a suspension will count against eligibility. Removing those two items are going to not allow me to vote for this as it is. I would be in favor of amending this to the 2.0 GPA and 1 failing grade, but I can't support it with unlimited absences and suspension. I mean, there's got to be, I understand using a method to encourage students, but there has to be some accountability. And I'm really not comfortable with any of this because this is completely opposite of what I do with my children. My two sons play baseball, and they have to make the honor roll to play baseball. They don't play baseball, and we hope they make the honor roll. So, I mean, it's totally opposite of how I would parent my own children. So I have a problem with the whole thing. However, I will trust our athletic directors. They want to make the changes. I'm willing to change it to a degree, but I cannot support it with for the reasons that I stated.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Yes, Ms. Abel.
I too cannot support this policy as written. As Mr. Hancock stated, I strongly believe if a child cannot attend school, then they shouldn't be playing sports. I will even go further that I don't believe that they should have failing grades and still be allowed to play sports or be involved in extracurricular activities. We are supposed to be educating first. So I will not be supporting this as written.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Abel. Yes, Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, and I respectfully understand where, my other two fellow board members are coming from. I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of community leaders and students in this aspect and trying to understand not just what sports mean for them, but extracurricular opportunities. And two things that I want to emphasize based on my understanding to this board is, number one, we're not just talking about sports. We are talking about critical access to opportunities like mentorship. And, these groups include organizations that might give a student a sense of purpose or identity in their school, including we have gay straight alliances, we have minority student unions. As of this, we're saying you don't deserve to have any part in those identity groups because you have more than one or a failing grade at this point, or so many absences. And I think, we're viewing it flipped. I think these programs are what will get students to that level we want them to be performing in. And when students don't have that family support at home, as was alluded to, I think these are the families outside of the families that our students need. And then the second part is the attendance. And I stand firmly in believing that we should follow other jurisdictions in getting rid of that policy. And I believe it was Mr. Valentine who mentioned last board meeting that this is self-enforcing. If you don't show up to school, you're not allowed to go to practice that day. If you don't go to practice that day, you're not allowed to go to the competition on Saturday. So the idea that 5 absences, or whatever the policy may be, if there's any restriction on absences, the idea that that is, somehow going to incentivize students, I think, once again, it's inverse. I think allowing them at any point to hop back on the train and saying, you know what, you don't got to wait until next quarter for those 5 absences to restart. If you start showing up now, well, guess what? You can go to the practices, you can go to the competitions. And likewise, if you stop, you will not be able to. And maybe we need to make that clear that students who aren't showing up to school shouldn't be participating in these practices and competitions, but that's my understanding of how it has been and how it continues to operate. So that's why I'm in support of this policy. And, having made the motion, this is a policy that's close to my heart because I've talked to a lot of students who have been in very rough times. And when we talk about mental health support, when we talk about academic support, mentorship, all of these go hand in hand. And I would never want to vote against something that would continue to deprive students of free opportunities, because we know there are so many paid opportunities out in the community, but these opportunities should be available to as many students as possible in our school building. Thank you.
Ms. Brown.
I agree with everything that Mr. Hurd has said. I see this as a way of getting kids back into connecting with school And I believe that if kids are connected with school, they're gonna wanna be in school and they're gonna come to school. I wish we had all parents like Mr. Hancock. That would make our job so much easier, but we don't. And sometimes these kids, the only thing they have is something in school that connects them. Some of their family, school is their family. And I think we want to do everything that we can to connect them with school and keep them in school, because if they're not in school, we can't do anything for them. We can't meet their mental health needs. We can't meet their academic needs if they're not in school. So I see this as a way of getting them back into school. And when you talk about attendance, 5 days, right now, kids that get COVID, they're gonna be home doing a self-test, and they aren't gonna be in school for 5 days. So that's almost like a mute issue right now with COVID and things that are going on right now. But like I said, I wanna do anything I can that will keep kids in school, get them in school, and connect them with something.
Any other comments? So, anything? Mr. Hancock? Well, I just wanted to say, so for Ms. Brown's point, and just so I'm clear and the public's clear, a sick day is not an absence. Okay, if you have a note, that's not an absence. So let's be clear about that. It's when you have an unexcused absence that counts against you as policy is currently written. I just want to make that clear. Mr. Hancock?
Thank you, Chairman. That was one thing I was going to bring up. It's if you read what is existing, you may provide documentation for a lawful absent within 5 days of the absence with a limit of 5 parent notes. So you can exceed, if I read this right, you can, if you can have 5 excused absences. You know, we talk a lot about student discipline, and we always use the excuse that we have to abide by what the state tells us to do. And some of the few tools that we have, we sometimes, in my opinion, want to just give them away. If you can't show up to school and not get suspended, that's like the easiest thing you can do. Not get suspended and show up to school. If that was all that was ever required of me, I mean, you know, we can't take that away. We have to have some kind of accountability, something. Again, I'm okay with going from a 225 to a 2.0. It's still a C average. Everyone fails a grade. You can work as hard as you can and fail a grade and get a C average. That's certainly possible, and nothing should be taken away from someone that works as hard as they can, and that happens. But we have to have a standard, and if we're going to take away our minimum standard of showing up and not getting suspended, that just, we've got to have something there. Could I make a motion to amend the motion that's on the table?
In a minute. Just want to make sure we get all the comments first. I have a couple of things I want to say, but.
Would you like me to comment, Mr. Lucas? You keep staring at me.
No, it's just my normal look to the right and go down the aisle.
Well, I'll comment. You know, I've thought long and hard about this eligibility policy, and I think you all know how I feel about it. But I did have conversations with some of my fellow board members regarding the recommendations, and I did say I was willing to compromise in some of the areas. In one of the areas, let me put it that way. But it was brought to my attention, and I was talking with a high school individual who said, because my area that I was willing to compromise on was the absences, but it was brought to my attention that, you know, some of the discipline problems, you know, would not be what we have if we didn't exclude kids from activities. They would have someplace to go. They would have something to do. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, to me that's true. Kids, you know, idle time makes for mischief in my mind, and not that that has anything to do with the absences, but overall, I feel very strongly about the underserved populations being acknowledged. So that's where I stand.
Okay.
Thank you for letting.
Sure. No, thank you, Ms. McGraw. Yeah, Ms. Brown.
Here I go again. Ideally, we know what we want parents to be able to do. But I'm going to tell you, I've had parents that you couldn't get them to write a note. They don't all come from ideal situations. And there's some parents that just don't take time to do anything. So it's up to that kid to do what they can to get out of school because they don't have that parental support.
So, a couple of things. One of the things that's hard to show is if any changes are made, how many more kids are going to participate. We saw how many could, but that doesn't mean that they will. And before we talked about equity and having the door open for more kids. If you would take that to the extreme, then you wouldn't have any barriers at all. You wouldn't have a GPA. Nothing would matter, and you could have 100% of the kids eligible. So why aren't we considering that? Just a question. I think to the folks that have spoke about having some sort of bar, I'm in agreement with that. I certainly think that the grade point average could come down to a 2.0, and we've seen that would open it up for a lot more students. But to say to a student, you're failing a class that you need to graduate, but go spend 20 hours a week doing this other activity, I'm not sure you can prove to me that there then is incentive for that student to try to do better in that class. And that's the difficult part for me. And that's exactly what we're saying. And when you talk about, and certainly in a sport, and in many extracurricular activities, that is a realistic amount of time. And I think our focus needs to be on the education. That GPA was there because when the policy was changed at the time, that is the GPA you needed to play at a Division I school. And I think we all can realize that most of our kids aren't going to do that. And so that's why I'm comfortable in lowering that. But there just isn't enough for me, and as emotional as it is for people, and myself included, you have to make decisions based on data. And no one has shown me that by doing this, you're going to have kids improve academically. I'm having a hard time seeing that. I want to have more kids, and as I said, I think, if the goal is to make it open, then take away every requirement. If the goal is really to make it open to every kid in high school. So those are my comments. And we have a motion that on the floor and seconded. Any other?
Is now the appropriate time to request an amendment?
If that's what you would like to do.
I would like to amend this, what's being proposed, and I'd like to amend it fairly drastically to where essentially the only thing we change is the 225 GPA to a 2.0 GPA.
Second.
Okay. So it's been moved by Mr. Hancock and seconded by Ms. Abel. Is there any discussion? Mr. Hurd.
I respect all the discussion we've heard, but, I'd say if you have to understand the impact that this decision has the potential to have. And we've talked so much about serving our students, and we have searched and searched. And I know, Mr. Hancock, you said, you know, the state takes away all of our tools. This is a tool, but it's the opposite. This is a tool to give more opportunity. This doesn't cost anything. It doesn't require more teachers. It's already there. And, you know, to the other point about, you know, are we going to allow students to spend 20 hours doing sports and these other activities? How will that benefit them? You know, once again, we are not talking just about sports, and I just have to insist, and I'll keep reiterating some other programs we have. JROTC. If you are not in a JROTC class and you want to be a part of their flag line, do you think they're outside having fun, lollygagging? No, they're learning discipline, management, teamwork. And if we don't view this as a holistic approach to children, and we think that children flip this switch and when they leave school, you know, good times, and when they come in school, it's just about academics, I think we are making a grave mistake. And so we talk about looking for data and indications that they will perform better in the future. And I would say, you know, if these other counties did it and they're not burning down and they're serving their students, then why aren't we serving our students the way they are? So I can't support this amendment because I think this is a very reasonable staff recommendation.
Any other comments? Okay. I have a question for you, Mr. Schwartz. Not just the amendment, but for a final vote. There are 7 of us in total here tonight.
The board needs 5 votes to pass any motion with an 8-member board,
Okay,
even if one member is
that's-
absent.
Just want to make that clear so the board understands that. Okay.
That includes any amendments to the motion.
Okay. So right now on the floor is the amendment to the motion. Is there any further discussion? Okay, yeah.
If in the case we had a student that was a very good student, an honorable student, and they got an F, they say they wanted to be in drama club, would they be ineligible to be in drama club? But their grades are all graded all across the board, but there's one subject that they just...
Under current policy, the answer to that, I believe, is yes.
They would be ineligible because they have a failing grade.
Correct.
That's correct. Under current policy.
Correct. So I have more to say on that, but let's get through this first. Okay, we have an amendment to the motion on the floor. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. It's Mr. Hancock and Ms. Abel. All those opposed? It's Ms. McGraw, Ms. Wilson, myself, and Ms. Brown. So the motion fails. Oh, I'm sorry, and Mr. Hurd. Apologies. So the motion fails. There's no further discussion. Then we will take a vote on the motion made by Mr. Hurd. All those in favor, please raise your hand. In favor is Mr. Hurd, Ms. Brown, Ms. Wilson, and Ms. McGraw. Opposed? Myself, Mr. Hancock, and Ms. Abel. So that motion does not pass. I certainly don't want to stop here because I think I'd like to have more discussion with my fellow board members. And Ms. Brown, you brought up a very good point about VF. And we heard in the last, in our last meeting about what other counties do. And I don't know how my fellow board members feel. You know, the F, you know, as I stated, if you're failing a grade that you need to graduate, is there, there certainly is a distinction between failing a class that's not required for graduation and a class that's required. That's a true statement. I'll look to the superintendent for that.
Yes, there are graduation requirements, and so there's a differences between classes that are electives and classes that are required for graduation.
Okay, and certainly, and we saw cases where and heard about kids that had very good GPAs, but failed the class because they just weren't getting that subject, or perhaps it was an elective that they didn't necessarily need, and then taking the course, it wasn't what they thought, so.
Or they were failing at that time when eligibility looks at for whatever sports. They may not necessarily fail the class for the entire year.
Correct. So as I stated, I'm lowering the GPA requirement is something that that I could accept, and I think I heard the same from Mr. Hancock. I think I'd like to have some discussion around the failing grade issue, and when if the kid is to the point, and I'll use high schools because this is most of what this focuses on. If there's something going on in that kid's life, and that kid is at a junior or senior in high school, then we, the collective we, in the system and all these other support mechanisms have failed that kid, and it should never have gotten to that point. And that's just my my sentiment. And to Mr. Hurt's point, there could be that kid that by doing something in the example you gave, you could really, really help. But I feel strongly that there are a lot of kids that simply won't change because there's no impetus for them to change if they're able to do something that they couldn't do under the current policy. Something that I had thought about, and I don't know, I'm just having a discussion. I don't want to make a motion right now, but we talk about, every kid that comes into high school in 9th grade, at least for the first quarter, gets a free pass, correct?
Yes.
They come in.
Currently, yes, for the
Okay.
first quarter.
So, if it's all about engaging kids and certainly making that acclimation to high school, perhaps the board should consider making all 9th graders for the entire year eligible with no stipulation at all, and then fall back to some combination of grade point average and if the board wishes, absences and things like that. But in doing that, for that entire year, that child has the opportunity to do all the things that Mr. Hurd so eloquently talked about and participate in all these things. And they do that from the get-go in high school, and there's no barrier to them doing that. And to me, that is taking on the challenge at the earliest possible point, and for all the things and all the benefits that everyone claims will happen because of doing that, you're going to do that with that kid when they're right in high school. And that can carry with them through their entire time, and they won't have anything to worry about for that first year, that they can participate in whatever activity they choose to participate in. So I throw that out as a discussion point among my fellow board members. And Mr. Hurd, you had a comment.
Thank you for your perspective, Mr. Lucas. I feel, as it stands, there is a conflicting logic. I feel like we're drawing a line in the sand and saying if you don't meet a 2.25 GPA, the failing grade requirement and the attendance requirement, if you are under that threshold, extracurriculars are a detriment to your education. But if you're above that line, they're a benefit. And I think, that point is made by how we allow 9th graders, in order to acclimate to their new school, to waive those requirements. And so, in this logic, if extracurriculars are a detriment to your education, then why don't we ban freshmen from participating in extracurriculars, since obviously they need to acclimate to high school? If these things aren't helping them and we're only in this business for academics, then why do we even let ninth graders do extracurriculars? And I think, the reason is what we all know. They help them. And I think what you just suggested in allowing them to participate for the entire year rather than one semester just further goes to show that you think when individuals participate in our extracurriculars, it helps engage them and keep their academics high. That's the only reason we would want to extend that time frame, at least my understanding would be. So I just feel that, the logic supports the staff recommendation, but since that has failed and, the votes don't exist, I am willing to hear, tangible proposals to do something to the same effect that is also desirable to other board members.
So if I could, to your comment, I think there are a lot of activities that a student participates in because they're there and because they don't cost anything for the student, particularly on the sports side, which tend to be the ones that if a child were to do that on their own, that there's a financial impact. But if they, particularly as younger kids, when a lot of JV teams generally don't cut anybody. So when you say it enhances, I meant to write down what you said. I'm not sure that it enhances them academically, but it's just an opportunity for them to participate. And I appreciate your perspective, but again, when something is classified as extracurricular, to me that it's a benefit that at some point needs to be earned. And as I said before, why do we have any requirement then? If the goal is to engage everyone, I mean, we saw the data last time, and by making those changes, there's still, 20+% of the kids that wouldn't make it. So, why don't we open it up to engage them? I mean, there's everyone's line and threshold is different, and so I'm trying to figure out something that we could agree on, and I think we all want to help students stay engaged, but again, academics, at least from my perspective, need to be the priority. And yes, doing an activity or sport could potentially help, but I've not seen anything that says to me it would help the majority of those kids. And I'll ask Mr. Schwartz a question. So if we do make a change to this, then we have to have another public meeting and let the public have an opportunity to comment, correct?
Any substantive changes would revert this to a report item. We come back as an action item at next
Right.
meeting.
And apart from saying tonight, the superintendent would like to have this by what date, if there is a change?
Well, it will have implications to scheduling and all of the sports for the fall that begin practice during the summer. So we would need to have it by the June board meeting ideally, if there is additional motions that are passed for changes.
Sure, and then it has to be incorporated as well when report cards go out to show what students would be eligible.
That's right.
Ideally correct.
Okay, but if it did happen by the June board meeting, that would.
It would still be in time at the
Okay.
June board meeting, correct.
Ms. Wilson?
So we're trying to find that sweet spot, and we're having this discussion, and I'm leaning towards a 2.0, and I'm looking towards the superintendent if we could go with no failing grade in required classes, and no more than 5 days as kind of a sweet spot. I was willing to go with the 1F. I haven't, this will be our 4th year on the board, and realizing this population of students, where the activities and the sports opportunities, it gives them hope. And you're looking at someone that believes in high standards. Ideally, I would like to be able to say a 3.0 grade point average. But it's just, I'm thinking about that underserved population that academics is not the hook. It's, we as a school system have to serve the whole child. And in those many instances for that small population, the family structure is not there. No matter what you put in place, they will never get out of that. They'll never reach that, situation. And so I'm all about raising the standards, but it's what is going to give some array of hope and opportunity for a coach or a music teacher to have that hook that pulls them out of that hole. And I'd like to hear from the superintendent, what are the pros and cons of a passing grade in a required class to see if we can move this forward?
Well, just a couple of thoughts as the board is grappling with this very difficult topic. If you, just to be clear, if you say no F in any required course for graduation, that I think makes it more difficult than the current language.
Okay?
If you say no more than 1F in a required course for graduation, I'm not sure what it would do. We'd have to take a look at that because you're talking about the courses that are required towards graduation, and you could have any grade in the electives, if you will. The GPA is a point of discussion for the board, and the question on the no more than 5 days, it's something to think about. I do want to point out that Mr. Hurd has made an important point in that we have procedures in place right now that if you do not attend school, you don't get to participate. And so in a way, it is interesting to look at the double impact of that, something to think about. And then just as a point for the board to think about is, there are other school systems that have looked at what Mr. Lucas has queued up, which is that 9th grade, and I think he meant, and maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I am, opening the eligibility or have everybody eligible as a first-year 9th grader. We do have some 9th graders that may be in their second year as 9th graders just based on electives, so first-year 9th graders, to have the flexibility to do that, and then the board would have to make a second decision about what it wants to do for anybody after their first year in high school as a 9th grader.
Yeah, and to your point, I thought about that because if everything that everyone said was true about a kid, finding that hook, somehow meshing up with an instructor or a coach, then they would have that from the get-go, and if then by doing that the benefits that everyone spoke about become true, then they're not going to have to worry about a GPA or a failing grade or anything. And so by doing that, it more or less provides the tangible proof one way or the other that opening up extracurricular activities to everyone keeps them engaged. A question that I have, and I apologize, I should have asked this before, but maybe you know, do we know for this school year how many kids became ineligible under the current policy?
So I think.
I don't, and I don't mean the graphs that were shown, but I mean kids participated in a sport or an extracurricular activity, and then if that crossed over a quarter, they would have been told sorry, or maybe not even a quarter if it had to do with the absences.
I'm sorry, I'm going back to the
Yeah.
data because what we did is the way we pulled the data was the first time we came to the board, we showed, and I'll look to Steve and Dr. Jones to say, I think the first presentation we provided you was looking at first marking period because of the fact that it was the first sort of comparison of marking period. And then the next time we came to you, we looked at what would it have been had we had this, this proposed revision in place versus what it is right now. And I think in there you saw, that's where you saw the increases for 21-22 going up to 79.9% versus the current 66%. What I don't think we have is the data from marking period to marking period. Part of our edit request was to think about this extending from just first marking period for that ninth grade year to a full semester, so that we could access the sports or the extracurricular activities and the extracurricular activities that start at different times of the year. So I don't think we have the numbers that would have become ineligible except for an entire year, if that makes sense.
It does. It would be a good data point to have, because if we would really see of the kids who wanted to participate, how many couldn't because of our current policy.
Well, except that I would say that the chart where we had at the last board meeting that showed eligibility status over time does show, maybe not by marking period, but an overall effect of an entire year of going from 66% eligible in 2021-22 with our current policy to the proposed eligibility going up to 79. So we don't know by marking period, but we know the totality of its impact by a whole year.
But, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but that's just the whole universe of students in CCPS. Not, all those students aren't participating, and there's no way to know who would participate
Yep.
after that. Mr. Jones?
So just to, because I think your original question was, the original question was, do we know how many students became ineligible, right? Who were eligible and participated and then became ineligible?
Correct.
So we do have that data already for, you don't have it, but we have that data, we track that data for our athletes at this point. We don't have that data already tracked for all of the other extracurricular activities. I'm sure we could get that data. That might take some time and some doing, but we could get that. But we do have already available the data that shows students who were eligible and were participating and then became ineligible. That's something we could pull and provide for you. We do have that.
And we have it by school and by sport and by grade for athletes.
And we don't have it for all the other activities, so we've been talking about how this is an engagement activity besides athletics to an extent. the other thing to mention here that's important to note is we've lost ground because of COVID. So every team, every group, we're working to revamp interest in. And we're gonna be doing that anyways. But I would suspect that we have seen loss of student engagement in school activities, even for students who meet the current eligibility requirement. And that has just been one of the impacts of that we're gonna have to ramp up for COVID in some ways.
Well, Ms. McGraw?
I'm just going to comment on a couple of things that you said, Mr. Lucas, about the Fs. Well, I still feel as though having one F would not hurt those individuals in their grade point averages if they were a high achieving student. I think they're going to reflect and monitor themselves and get that grade point up. It's going to have more of an effect on those individuals, I think, that have like a 2.5, 2.25 or 2.0, because then they're going to automatically, because they're be ineligible, because they're going to be kicked out of it because of their 1F. And I think that we have to look at, sometimes think about what might have caused that 1F. That there's a number of circumstances that could have, contributed to that. Maybe there was a death in the family. Maybe the parents divorced. Maybe the kid was sick. But to say that, I disagree with you, Mr. Lucas, that an extracurricular activity needs to be earned. I can't agree with that. I just feel as though there are some of us who do not have children who are high achievers, that they have talents, but they're not allowed to express them because they don't have, the ability to score high. And I go back to where I was, wanting to make sure that every child has an equal opportunity. Equity is making sure that every child has what he or she needs to be successful. And that's where I see our, policy being affected. And I don't see that happening without accepting the recommendations.
Ms. Brown?
I guess I don't see an extracurricular activity as something that kids have to earn. I think it's something that it should be used to enhance their education in school. I see it as something that every kid should be able to be in if they want to be in it. I don't think school is all about school is not academics. It's about building other things in children. You might have a kid that wants to be in an art club, but they just don't do well in chemistry or whatever. But I don't think they should be penalized because of an academic grade. Because I think they're in school to learn there's other things to learn in school other than the academics. I'm all for high academics, but I'm also in getting kids educated and becoming good citizens too.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And academics is more than just a hard science or reading and writing, and it is those things that you spoke about that are taught in a number of different classes. Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. So my concern at this point is that I feel, all board members have talked to the point that we're all comfortable on where we stand, and I don't feel like we're making a lot of progress in changing minds. And so looking at this timeline, I believe the superintendent has made it clear, if we are to take any sort of action, it has to be done on a timeline here, and we're short on time. And so I've been, obviously where I stand, but I've been thinking about what Mr. Lucas has been saying, and I'm trying to think of a solution, that can appeal to some of the values you have stated. And so There are two possibilities I want board members to consider, and if you want to shoot them down right out of the gate, that's okay with me. I just want to throw ideas so we have something to work with. So I know you mentioned a hook. You feel that this is a hook and that, if it works, and I believe it works, we see that it gets students more engaged. And so you talked about allowing ninth graders their first year to participate. And so I would, and I don't want to make it more complicated than it has to be, but I would raise the idea of a graduated system where we're slowly imposing this high Charles County standard that we have on these students over the course of their high school career, considering that for most middle schoolers, they're not dealing with this. And so I think if we go from, ninth grade, no standard your first semester, to the highest standard in the state of Maryland, I think it's no wonder we're not hooking them fast enough in that half a semester. So perhaps a graduated system where we take staff recommendations and do it over, certain periods of your high school career. And then the second thing I was mulling in my head is Dr. Navarro's point really stuck with me of we lost ground because of COVID. And while these standards might have been very reasonable when the board made this change, I believe in 2014 or whenever Ms. Abel had previously stated it to be, what if we temporarily lowered the bar to allow some of these students to get back on the train? Because the train left the station while they were at home. And I've been in these high schools meeting with these students, and you have to realize, I believe at this point, it's a majority of our students are back in the school building for the first time as high schoolers, and they have a middle school mentality. We're seeing it with our behavior, and we're seeing it in all of our aspects of our school, and yet we're imposing the hardest standard in the state of Maryland. So if my fellow board members can't get behind the staff recommendation for regular students, then can we consider one of these proposals that lean students into it or take into consideration the fact that we've had COVID? And so that way these existing high schoolers, starting with the ninth graders coming in, there's that expectation you're worked into our system just like the old students were. But the current high schoolers have a semblance of, we want you back on the train. We love you. We appreciate you. Let's get those standards back up. So 2 thoughts to consider.
So I appreciate your comments, Mr. Hurd. And listening to everyone speak too, I've stated already that rolling back the GPA is something I could support, and I think even the attendance requirement for the reasons that were stated, because in order to participate in whatever they're going to participate in, they need to be in school that day. I brought up the ninth grade scenario, and maybe that's too big of a bite for everyone to swallow. But for my fellow board members, I'm good with the 2.0 and even relaxing the attendance requirements. And I think those, in just looking at the data, that would that's half of the students identified in the data that were shown. I could even, and this would take a little more discussion, I think, but I could even talk about a failing grade as long as a certain GPA was maintained, for the reasons, again, that people spoke to. So I don't know how my fellow board members feel about that. Again, just trying to talk all this before, hopefully, we have some sort of motion before we leave tonight, rather than have a motion and try to amend it and go back. Ms. Wilson.
We're discussing this out loud, so you would be okay as chair of a 2.0.
Just okay. It doesn't matter that I'm chair, but yeah, go ahead.
2.0, one failing grade.
I'm not ready to go there yet, but let's stay
2.0, no failing grade and no more than 5 days.
No, I would even defer on the attendance requirement would be dropped altogether. And if you did that, then you would, half of the students identified in the data that we were shown would become eligible.
2.0, one failing grade, or no failing grade.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
apologize.
No. 2.0,
I'm not laughing at you.
2.0, and no attendance requirement. What do you think about that, Ms. Abel?
I still can't give up the attendance I mean, if you cannot make it to school, how can you make it to practice? How can you make it to the game?
Well,
If you have the gumption to make it to the and not just athletics, I know that. If you can get up and make it to your club meeting, to your band performance, to your choir performance, you can get up and make it to school.
Yeah.
And the excused absences are there. We're only talking unexcused absences.
And I hear what you're saying, and in listening to what other folks have said, you know, there are kids, and I put myself in that category, not so much when I was in high school, but when I was in middle school, where there were days where just didn't want to go to school for a number of reasons. And if there were something, and you know, this is a long time ago, right? This is 40, 50 years ago. That if there were something that at least draws the kid to the school, then it's better than the kid not being there at all. I mean, we say that all the time when we talk about not wanting to suspend kids because they don't do better unsupervised at home. They do better in the school. So I appreciate everyone's point. It's, you know, the engineer in me just doesn't see, again, at some point you're taking a leap of faith that no one can ever show you that doing all this is going to improve. And again, people maybe not agree that it's necessary, but doing this will improve them academically. That's what we're trying, at least that's what I'm trying to get to. And maybe some people has been expressed that isn't a necessary concern, that just having them participate in a certain activity is part of the whole school experience. And I agree with that. But again, I think our top priority is still focused on the academics. But back to your point, yes, 2.0 and the absences are something that I could live with. Ms. Brown?
I'm trying to figure out what we're afraid of losing with this policy.
I think I'll speak for myself, that a kid is not, and again, we can't prove this one way or the other, that let's suppose they could participate carte blanche without any requirement, but academically they're failing. It was that, and again, everyone's level of tolerance is different, but we can say, oh, you know, they're a great athlete, and they like to play in the band, but they've got a 0.3 GPA. Is that a win? I asked the question.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out if we already
Yeah.
say they have to have a 2.0, they have to do something academically. And hopefully, being around other kids would encourage them to even get better grades. 'Cause sometimes kids learn from their peers, and they see their kids being successful, and they want to do the same thing. But I don't know what we're losing. Because kids that want to do well are going to do well anyway. We're trying to get those kids in school to connect with school. And I don't know what we're losing one way or another. I don't know what we're losing. If you could explain that to me, what we're losing by trying something different.
Well, I think specifically with regard to the failing grade, again, if a student is failing a course they need to graduate, yet spending a lot of time doing these other things, and they end up not graduating, have we really done the right thing?
I understand what you're saying, but I just don't see a kid that's coming to school, they want to graduate, they're in an extracurricular activity, not wanting to improve that grade so that they can graduate because they're in school. Maybe I'm missing something. I just don't see
Well, I think,
them not wanting to do better.
well, I think, I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a kid has an F in a required course, they will not graduate?
That's correct. If they have a final grade of an F in a course. And I want clarification, and I think, I just want clarification on what you said earlier, Mr. Lucas, and you haven't put a motion on the table, you just are making some comments, but I'm keeping kind of like comments for everybody on which options they're talking about, and I thought we went around in a circle a little bit, so I just want to clarify. So one of the things you were talking about is continuing to maybe around some of your peers, the question of bringing the GPA from a 2.25 to a 2.0, not having an attendance requirement, partially to the comments around attendance is already sort of built into whether you get to participate or not in extracurricular activities. What I didn't hear clearly, and I thought I heard two different things, is not right now, the recommendation from staff is that students have no more than one failing grade and have a 2.0 and take away the attendance requirement. And I'm just curious if that aligns with what you're saying.
No, it does not. The failing grade is still an issue with me.
Meaning that
Please
you
speak.
want to, so staff's recommendation is to keep the wording that says no more than one failing grade. That's staff's recommendation.
Understood. And again, if this is just my personal opinion, that if you're failing a course, that there needs to be some time spent
Right, so it
on
would
not
be
failing that course.
So it would be no failing any courses, a 2.0, and no attendance requirement.
Correct. And I would even, if we saw examples where students had a failing grade, but they had a very, had a decent GPA above what was needed to
Yeah.
participate. That could be an option as well for the reasons that Ms. McGraw and others said, that there are circumstances sometimes that a student, just for that brief period of time, might have a failing grade in one particular course. Ms. Abel?
So if you remove the attendance requirement, that also removes the suspension. So if they're suspended, they can still participate.
According to what staff brought forward to the board, Ms. Abel's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I could not support that. And I think in all of our discussion about attendance, it all revolved around, a home life situation and not a suspension.
Right.
Yeah, if someone suspension is discipline, and disciplining someone and then having them participate seems counterintuitive.
And we're still talking unexcused absences. You can still have 15 excused absences and participate, and 4 unexcused and participate.
Well, I think that would be, and I hear what you're saying, I think, and again, we're not focusing on sports, but for a sport, that would be hard to do because you have to be in school to participate that day. I'm sorry, Mr. Hurd.
No problem. You know, I've just been sitting on the discussion about the attendance requirement, and I feel, as previously stated by Dr. Navarro, we have things in place to self-enforce that policy without this. And so the question is, you know, what difference does this policy make? And I think, quite frankly, the only difference it makes is it holds people's life emergencies and things as they come up and they least expect it and least, you know, they're least engaged with our school system. It holds them to a quarter standard. And we know life doesn't work in quarters in the real world. And so, you know, back to Mr. Lucas's point, I completely agree with Mr. Lucas that with the sports, you know, this is self-enforcing, and no reasonable coach will allow a student to get to that point and still have any time on the field. It's just another carrot for them to potentially get back into this system.
So I know we just talked a lot. I appreciate everyone's indulgence in this. And you doing your fingers, Mr. Hancock, or do you have a comment?
I didn't run it long, but I will say one thing. I've been debating.
I think we're all here. It's
Yeah,
a good time to talk about it.
Sure, and I want to make it clear, I respect everyone's opinion on this. This is a tough issue, and I respect what staff is proposing to us, and I do honestly believe that what's being proposed is in the best interest of trying to do the best thing for everyone, and no one with a conscience or a good heart can take anything away from that. I do have a big problem with the attendance, as Ms. Abel has stated, and obviously the suspension, which may or may not be dropped, I don't know, but you know, it's 5 unexcused absences. You can't have any more than 5 unexcused absences per quarter. We're talking about a hook, okay? And some of these people that we're trying to get a hook are in 10th, 11th grade, either getting ready to go to college or the workforce. When you join the workforce, the time for hook is over. Next year, when you graduate, if you go and expect the employer to give you a hook, the hook is that you don't work there anymore. If you show up 5 days in 2 months, if you miss that many days, so we're not preparing our students for reality when we think about it that way. And that's the God's honest truth. It's a truth whether we want to say that it doesn't make any sense or we don't want to say it's equitable, but it's reality and it's the truth. And we have to be careful that we don't set our students up to fail when they leave here because we've coddled them too much. The real world is mean and it's nasty and it doesn't care about any of us. And that's the God's honest truth. So I cannot make any exceptions on the attendance or the suspensions. And that's all I will say about that. Thank you.
Can I make a clarification on the suspension piece?
Yeah.
So the suspension, when you're suspended from school, you're no longer in school. So those count against you anyways. And then sometimes for a lot of activities, if you're not physically in school that day, you're not going to be allowed to participate, whether it be the sports event, the drama club, because you're not physically in school that day. And I think that's the point. So while technically we drew a line over the suspension piece, it's the same thing. If you're suspended and you're not physically in the school, those days are going to count against you anyways, and you're not there. Regardless if you're sick or not sick, let's say you miss a week because you got sick. Chances are that if there's a game or there's an activity on Saturday and you've missed the whole week, let's say it's a play, you've missed the whole week, chances are you're probably not gonna do the activity on Saturday because you've been out that whole week. So I think this question, while I understand the point of view around attendance, I want you to know practically what happens in schools. And practically what happens in schools, and I think we have 3 students, what usually happens in school, and Mr. Lee, you may want to correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you're not physically there, excused or unexcused, and you haven't been there continuously for a period of time, you're likely not going to participate for whatever reason, whether your parent gives you an excuse note or not. So that's, I think, what practically happens. I think in writing as a academic concept, it makes sense, the attendance conversation, but I think practically, I'm not sure that our schools are instituting that. They're looking at, did you learn the lines? Have you been at debate meetings? Have you participated in this? If you haven't been here, I can't have you participate or compete or do whatever because you just haven't been here, regardless of whatever the excuse may be. So I just want to throw that out there. And then the suspension piece that Ms. Abel brought up, technically, it's sort of a what is it called? Self-fulfilling prophecy, because we actually pull kids out when they are suspended.
I'm sorry, Ms. Abel.
With all due respect, I have heard probably and chance, but I had 4 children in the school system, and I know what happens in the school system. It is not a written policy that if they're not in school, they cannot participate. It is not a written superintendent's rule. It is not even in the school rules that they cannot participate. It is practiced, but I know for a fact, my own daughters on cheerleading, on soccer, if they miss that day, but they're the star flyer and they're needed for a competition, they're going to be allowed to go ahead. You cannot tell me that the main quarterback on the football team, if this policy is not in place, that coach is going to say, okay, you can be here, but you can't participate. I don't see it happening.
Mr. Lee?
We have it in our handbook that they have to be in school 1/2 of that day, and lunch does not count as a period to participate that day.
That's the athletic handbook.
Yes.
We're talking about all extracurricular activities.
It should be considered that way. Whether the clubs do, I can't speak to that.
Ms. Wilson, and then Ms. McGraw.
I just want to see where people's appetite, I'm looking at a 2.0, no more than 1 F, and no unexcused absences. I'm just having that,
Yeah.
and if the chair will, once he's done with questioning, I will put the motion on the floor.
Ms. McGraw?
So, in light of the fact that I wasn't aware about, maybe I was, but I wasn't paying attention to the suspension part of it. And I did say that I would compromise, but then I changed my mind.
It's all our prerogatives.
But I'm gonna go back and be a woman of my word. And I can compromise on the attendance. If we can have the 2.0 and 1F. Isn't that what we said? Yeah.
Not quite.
Well,
Yeah.
This will-
Yeah.
If I could just clarify the suspension wording.
Yeah.
It was never the intent of the board to tie suspensions to eligibility. The reason why that language is in there is because the board wanted to give a lawful absence some clarification. The word lawful absence is defined in COMAR as all of those bullets that are on there.
All right.
And suspension is a lawful absence under COMAR. Because if you tell a student they're suspended, it's lawful that they're away from school. So that's a lawful absence. So the board wanted to clarify that we weren't intending to include suspensions in that long list. But otherwise, suspensions was not intended to be anything different than any other kind of absence. So I think, I didn't want the board to be confused by why that language was included to begin with. So, just to lay that out.
It doesn't say it's a lawful absence. It says that it will count against eligibility.
Correct, because under COMAR, so a suspension is counted as a lawful absence. So when the board adopted the policy, they wanted to clarify that even though all of these lawful absences would be excused, a suspension would not be excused.
Okay.
So that's why they did not include it in that long list with the bullets and expressly said a suspension will count against eligibility. But it wasn't intended to say we're going to target suspended students and not make them eligible. That was not what the board was trying to do when adopting that language.
I didn't quite finish my comment. Well, my comment was that, you know, I think that the staff brought these recommendations to us for a reason. That there needs to be, we need to look at it, we need to make some change. And I think they put a lot of work into it. I don't want us to walk away and not having considered making some sort of a change for the students. So I would like us to be able to walk away with some kind of compromise on the recommendations so that there is a change in the policy moving forward.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, I'm done now.
Okay. Ms. Wilson?
I would like to make a motion to accept the 2.0 grade point average as recommended, along with no more than one F, and waive the attendance requirement.
Second.
No, that's not.
Ms. Wilson, how is that different than what was already voted down?
Yeah.
She's saying not to include the attendance.
Not to include the attendance.
So the attendance piece would still
Stay
count
at
against
5.
the students?
Right.
Okay, I understand. Okay.
So, just before,
And that's why it's important to clarify, because there's a lot of.
Can I seek clarification? Sorry, I'm writing these down. So, the motion on the table is that it is a 2.0 GPA, no more than one F grade. And you had mentioned no unexcused absences, but now you're saying
Whatever the,
no.
Leave all that absence stuff alone, right?
Yes.
Attendance stays the way it originally is.
Right.
Attendance stays the way it originally was.
Right.
Got it, okay.
is that the motion?
That's the motion.
I'll second it.
I think
Ms.
Ms.
Brown already did.
Sorry, I didn't know anyone.
Ms. Brown did second.
Okay, sorry.
I'll start with the discussion. I think, again, the failing grade is the thing that I'm very hard over on. I mean, the eligibility in the 2.0, if we as a board were to compromise on that, you would capture half of the kids identified in the chart that we saw last time. So that is my comment, and but we have a motion and a second on the floor. Yeah.
Clarification.
Yes.
Clarify the motion. So are we including staff's recommendation to take it from 1 quarter to the first semester of 9th grade to be used to determine eligibility? For 9th grade year, I believe it was in the proposal.
I think that was not what Ms. Wilson said, but I think that yes, that is the intent, because that is what staff proposed.
And if the statement that I want to, what the staff recommended for the 9th grade, for clear, but I did not state that.
Is Ms. Abel? Yeah.
I feel like a broken record. I can waver on the grade point average to 2.0 because we've had a rough few years. but I cannot waver on the F or the attendance.
And as I said, the F is what is of concern to me, the attendance, I'd be willing to forego the attendance altogether in a 2.0, which is not what the motion on the floor is right now. Yeah, Mr. Hancock.
Thank you, Chairman. I can support this. Don't want to, but I can. It solves my biggest concerns. And I'll go back to, if we're going to give you everything you need to get ahead, you just got to show up and not get suspended. And this solves that issue for me. So thank you.
So do we, okay, just one second. We have to have a motion and a vote, or can we just craft language so they can come back at a later time?
If the motion on the floor passes, it will come back as an action item at the next board meeting,
Okay,
final action.
okay.
But we're hoping, and if I could speak for the superintendent, we're hoping to get some direction from the board tonight so that when we come back as an action item in June, we do have a final up or down vote so we can take action on that action. If we
Yeah.
wait beyond June's
Right.
14th board
No,
meeting.
no, understood. Have the timeline.
Clarification, if we vote on the amendment tonight and it passes, why wouldn't we be done? Why would it have to come back as an action?
Because it's a substantive change to the superintendent's recommendation.
But all of the items, we're not adding additional items. All of the items that are being brought forth have already been discussed and are already on there.
Correct, but what's being brought as an information and report item is what's before you, is the superintendent's recommendation. So if the board is making a substantive change to what the superintendent's recommending at an action item stage, it reverts back to a report item.
Okay.
All right, so the motion on the floor is that, I'm gonna get staff's recommendation, excuse me. So, if we could refer, Ms. Mackey, can we get the document that says Board Policy 6431 draft? Yeah, it's the first, there we go. So that
Shelley, can you move it up so just the blue chart, no, down, yep, just so the two parts of the blue chart is highlighted, and if we could make it just a little bit bigger.
Yeah, so this way we're
Please.
all,
so we
looking
can
at,
all see that,
we're all
yep.
looking at the same thing. and
Perfect. Thank you,
everyone
Shelley.
can see. So, the motion and then on the floor, if we're looking at everything in the blue box, it keeps where I'm reading ninth grade, the first bullet stays the same. That was a question.
Stays as it's written, so it
Right.
it
Stays as
takes that
written.
quarter and it changes to semester.
Correct.
Okay.
The second bullet stays the same.
It stays as, it stays written as it was edited, yes.
Correct. And then the third bullet
Comes back.
Comes back.
comes back.
Mm-hmm.
And then similarly, in 10th through 12th grade, the first two bullets remain unchanged, but the third bullet would come back. Correct?
And then the language directly under that, the lawful absences, the reference to that would also come back, just
Yeah,
clear.
lawful absence would come back.
Okay. So, That's the motion on the floor. That's been seconded by Ms. Brown. Is there any other discussion? Okay. So, this time, we will have a vote, and then this language will come back at a later date so that we can vote on it as an action item.
If it gets
If it
5
passes.
If it passes. If it passes. Doesn't pass, we're gonna have words in the parking lot. Okay? Okay.
Chocolate chip cookie.
All right. There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. In favor, Mr. Hancock. Wow, Ms. Brown, Ms. Wilson, and Ms. McGraw. All right. So, all those opposed? Mr. Hurd, Ms. Abel, and myself. So, we were closer there. And I understand we do not have a board member with us tonight. But without saying too much, understand she's shared what she believes. I don't know that things would have been different, but perhaps next time. So, Mr. Hancock.
Well, thank you, Chairman Lucas. Would it be, will we be better served to try this again at our next meeting with a full board? Is that doable?
We could, but I don't want to speak for Ms. Lockhart, but I don't.
Mr. Lucas,
Yeah.
I'm just curious, one of the things that was put out there was the 9th grade year. I guess the question is, does the board want to entertain any amendments to the first year 9th graders that they would align to in terms of giving some guidance to staff?
Well, I mean, I already said what I said about 9th graders, and again, if we really think this would help them better achieve in their complete school experience, then you could just open it up. I mean, we're already doing it for half the year, correct? First quarter, sorry. So first quarter, and, sorry, proposal is for first semester, my mistake. So, and I'm certainly okay with that. I don't know how the rest of the board feels as far as 9th graders. Ms. Abel?
I would be opposed. We're already lengthening it from quarter to semester. Or extending it.
Well, folks, unless anyone has anything else, I guess we could threaten to have another meeting before our next board meeting, and that might that might give us all a little impetus. Yeah. Yeah. So. Yeah, Mr. Hurd. Yeah, Mr. Hurd, please.
You know, I know we're facing a very tough decision. Just, you know, as it stands, I think we are hastily rushing into this and making compromises we don't understand the impact that will have. And I can't support us compromising in haste cleaning our hands of the problem and saying, job well done. And I just think we need more stakeholder input, and I'd like to see more perspective.
Well, I mean, if I could, I think unless there's a completely new variable that's introduced, we've got the three knobs that can be turned, okay, and that's GPA, attendance, and a failing grade. And we know, based on the data that we've received, how that broadens the aperture if you turn each of those knobs. And so I don't think the decision is a hasty one. It's just a difference of opinion between board members on what should be done.
If I may respond.
Yeah, sure, please.
I understand where you're coming from. I just feel like over the course of the night, we've made a lot of assumptions of what would lead a child to these circumstances. We've challenged their home life. We've talked about the effort they're putting in, and I want to see it. If we're going to make a compromise in haste, I want to see what we're talking about. And I know, you mentioned multiple times us using words like probably and hoping, or maybe it was Miss Abel. Why don't we hear from some students? So I want to challenge staff, because we're going to have to come back to this. Is it possible to hear, case studies with, personally identifying information taken off, or just, I think the board needs to understand, because I don't think we're understanding the implication of these numbers, and I can't support this compromise in haste.
Well, can't speak for the rest of the board, Ms.
I don't think I made my compromise in haste,
Yeah.
because I did talk about the fact that I thought about this long and hard, and I was willing to make a compromise, and I had conversation with another board member and said I was willing to do that, but then the heart overtook the head at one point. And after I listened to conversations this evening, I felt that I could make that compromise. So I don't think that I made my compromise in haste. I can't speak for other board members.
Yeah, and I would agree with Ms. McGraw. I mean, it's, this was originally drafted several years ago, and I was part of that, and now I'm willing to step back and drop the grade point average and drop the attendance requirement based on all the discussions that we've had. But again, just our individual thresholds are at different places, and there was, believe me, a lot of thought that went into this. And Mr. Hancock.
Thank you, Chairman. I also would like to respond to that. I certainly did not propose any compromises in haste. This is the third time that we've all seen this. The first time I saw it, I automatically knew that the absences and suspension, and I know we talked about it a million times, but I automatically knew that that's something that I couldn't support. And that comes from my professional side. That's something I wouldn't tolerate from several high school students that I have employed, and some of them didn't last too long because of that. So that's something that jumped out at me. This is how democracy works. Sometimes to get things done, you have to compromise. If I stood here and held firm on every daggone thing I want to do, I could go home at night and clap myself on the back and say, well, I didn't vote for that, but I didn't do anything. So, everyone just has a different set of opinions and a different set of things that they will stand firm on, and also a different set of standards that they can compromise on. So that's just my personal opinion on that. Thank you.
So,
I'm sorry.
go ahead. I had a request of the superintendent, so please, you're first.
A question. The board's taken 2 votes, but the one vote that they haven't taken is the motion that you would have made and you had not made yet. Mm-hmm. And that's the 2.0, no failing grades, and you remove all references to absences. Right. And based on the votes tonight, there have been at least 5 board members who have supported combinations of that. So I can't make motions, obviously, but trying to salvage what it sounds like the board is looking to do
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that's something that you wanted to consider.
Well, obviously, if I brought it up, I think I'd like to consider it.
And point of, we have taken 3 votes.
Yes, because we took an amendment.
We had an amendment.
Yeah, and then but 2
Yeah.
votes on the final.
So, as Mr. Schwartz so eloquently pointed out, and all of us have reflected and compromised a little bit. So I will make a motion now that the grade point average remain as presented by staff, and that the attendance requirement remain as stated by staff, but that a student may not have a failing grade.
Clarification, so we would be dropping the attendance requirement.
Correct. So that is my motion.
So what's the GPA on that?
2.0.
And just to clarify, I still want to make sure I clarify what Jennifer said. So we're going to accept what staff is proposing on attendance right now, crossing what's in front of us.
That's correct.
Thank you.
That's correct.
But they can't have any Fs.
That is also correct.
Mr. Lucas?
But they can miss school as much as they want.
If, that's a motion, we can discuss that if there's a second. So there's a motion on the floor.
Can I ask for clarification?
Please.
The 9th grade policy?
Stays the same.
Staff recommendation of a semester?
Yes.
I second that motion.
All right. So Mr. Hertz seconds the motion. Discussion. So, I think I'll speak in listening to everyone and again reflecting on personal experience. If there's something that keeps a kid in school, then we all say that kid is better off in school. And so if there's that hook, and then if they're not failing a class, then I think that student's overall educational experience is best served. Is there any other discussion? Okay. So I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of that motion, please raise your hand. That's Mr. Hurd and myself and Ms. Wilson. All those opposed? Mr. Hancock, Ms. Abel, Ms. McGraw, and Ms. Brown.
It was worth a shot.
It's worth a shot. So I'm going to ask if the superintendent, if it's possible, again, and I think I heard that part of this data was available. How many kids this year became ineligible under the current policy? If we could have that data point.
So I heard a different question earlier, Mr. Lucas. I'm not trying to be difficult, I just want to be clear. We have a chart that we provided 2 meetings ago that said that, based on our current policy for the school year 21-22, we had 66% of our student body be eligible based on our current one. If the recommendations were in place as staff recommended to the board, that number would be 79.9%. I think the earlier question you asked me is how many students did we lose from marking period to marking period earlier? And we can try to figure that piece out. But I think this chart might be answering, if I understand correctly, what your question is, which is, you know, from 66% to, let's just say 80%, that would have been the delta.
But these aren't necessarily students that participated in an extracurricular activity.
Correct,
This is
so,
just the whole body of students. So what I'm asking is, at some point during this school year, a student became ineligible for one of the reasons under the current policy.
mhm.
So if we could find out how many kids became ineligible.
Okay, because of one of the reasons of the policy.
Because that way, that's a real data point that says, well, gosh, I wanted to do this, but now I can't because of my GPA or too many absences, or I failed this class.
Right.
So now we can see, in reality, how many kids became ineligible. I mean, this is great, that chart, but the reality is that most kids are not going to participate in some sort of extracurricular activity. So even though the candidate pool is bigger, it's not as though people are clamoring up to do something different.
So I guess so two things. We have that data for the athletes because we actually have a system by which we capture that for the athletes and monitor it, because we need that information. It will be difficult for us this time of year without having instituted a system in place for everything else where students participate.
So if we could just have it, I'm sorry, this is just me asking, just for the athletes then, because I know there's so much going on right now. And I'm pretty sure you had.
Data now, don't we? I mean, we can give you that data now because we actually keep that data.
Like now is in the next 30 seconds, or?
Yes, we have the
Yes,
charts,
we-
right, Dr. Jones?
Yes, we do have that information available right now. We could show you that by school, by sport, and by grade.
We
The
do
number
have
of
that chart.
students who were participating and became ineligible after the 9-week period you're talking about.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And just one quick thing before the board decides whether they want to hear that data or not tonight. One thing that's important to note is, as the board makes a policy, there is something also innately different about a student who is already part of a team or a structure and becomes ineligible versus how many more students would participate. And I said earlier in an earlier meeting that whatever the board decides to do or not do around the policy, regardless of what the policy says, that does not negate staff's responsibility to, whatever the standard is, get more kids to that standard. So whatever you decide the standard to be, I would advise the board to make that the standard, because as a collective group, you think that's the right standard as you compare yourself to yourself and others. And then no matter what the standard is, the school system's responsibility is to continuously work to prepare more and more students to have, to meet that standard, because, as Mr. Hancock says, the world has standards for a whole bunch of things, so it's our responsibility. And so the conversation on the policy aspect of it, as the board looks at it, is what's the line that the board is willing to draw that makes sense in terms of the values of the board, its comparison to itself, to others in this arena. We can provide sort of the information that you wanted for athletics. I'm just concerned that we may not be able to accurately get the information for the other 25 different programs or so in our high schools at this point, right? Yeah.
Does the board want to see that information?
I don't need to see it.
Right.
'Cause that's to me.
Well, unless anyone else has any comments, I think we've had a healthy discussion, but it appears that we're not going to be able to reach a solution that a majority of the board is agreeable to. So I would, I think what we would need to do, we will need to have another meeting between now and our next board meeting, to at least move forward so that you can present something at our board meeting. And individually, we can reflect on tonight and perhaps when we come together next time, we will we'll all be together, and we can put forth something that you can have for us in June.
Mr. Lucas,
Yeah.
is there any interest in us bringing forward does the board have any interest in looking at any of these grade levels differently, uncoupling any of the grade levels? So there were vast discussions this year around ninth graders and the transition of students from middle school to high school. I'm just trying to figure out.
What sort of data are you talking about?
Well, I'm just trying to figure out when you mentioned bringing something back, what staff can bring back additional to the board.
Well, I think if you could send that data that you just talked about on athletics,
Okay.
that would be good. And I guess I would just ask my fellow board members to to think of something that perhaps majority of the board can agree upon. But we will have to come back before June. And yes, Ms. Abel.
We have a whole week's worth of graduations before the next board meeting.
It has to be public.
Well, the next board meeting is the 14th?
Correct.
Yeah.
And just recognize that the meeting you'll have about this would be public. We'd like to televise it to make it open to the public.
Absolutely.
So graduations is a great time for the board to be together, but it might not be the best time for the board to sit in a public session to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were referring to the fact that we were just going to be busy. You were.
Yes, that was.
That's what I thought. I think she was just saying we're going to be busy.
Not to meet then.
Okay,
No.
you heard it the other way around.
Televised
No, but
at
I was thinking the board meeting was the week after
Yeah, the board meeting is the
graduations. There's a whole
14th.
week in between.
Yeah. Plenty of time. All right, folks, I appreciate everyone's indulgence tonight, really do. It's obviously something that's important and passionate to all of us, and I would just ask everyone to, again, we do what's best for the entire system and the educational integrity of the system. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
We have.
Oh, sorry. Good Lord. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Don't second it.
So moved.
I got board docs off my screen. Yes, so, TC Martin, I'm sorry. We've got,
Motion to pass the T.C. Martin Elementary renovation contract.
second. It's been moved by Ms. Abel, seconded by Mr. Hancock. Any discussion? You do not, no, it's
Not contracts.
monetary, yeah. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand, and that is unanimous vote of all present.
Look, we
Okay,
can
thank-
agree on something.
Thanks. Well, I think
Bet you we
I
can
thi- I
agree on
think we-
something else too.
I think we
I move
agreed-
to adjourn.
So moved. I think we agreed on about 80% of something, just not all at the same time. So, moved and seconded. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thanks a lot, folks. Appreciate it. Good night, everybody.